Hello, today my interview is about the relationship of faith and the commitment to climate action. My guest is PaulBlaschke, a member of the Jewish progressive community in Wellington. Let me further introduce Paul to you. PaulBlaschke is a New Zealander of German descent. He was born and raised in Wellington, lived and traveled widely, especially within the Pacific and in Europe, but always returning to Wellington. He studied botany and ecology before concentrating on landscape ecology and earth sciences for his PhD. He has extensive experience in urban ecology, biodiversity, conservation, sustainability, and development issues. When the Religious Diversity Center set up a national working group to address religious perspectives of climate change, Paul became a member of this new climate change advisory group. Paul, thank you very much, first of all, for joining us today. From my very short version of your extensive and fascinating biography, we can see immediately that you must have been very interested in nature from a very early age. Do you remember how this interest in nature and science started?
Hello, Beate, and thanks for your introduction. So I think it did start with my parents and their background, and although they were very much city people, they both came from large German cities. They, like many other Germans, and you might resonate with this, they really loved walks in the countryside, the Ausführungen, and we were certainly taken out into the countryside with for a walk, or just walking around city, the green spaces in the city at every opportunity. So I think that rubbed off, and I became a Boy Scout, and I particularly enjoyed the camping, which was a new thing for me, and the outdoor stuff. And I was lucky enough when I was at secondary school to have a couple of really good science teachers. I was always quite interested in science, and these two particular teachers that stand out in my memory were both particularly interested in botany and ecology, and I do always remember them as being very formative. So I think I always wanted to go to university, and it never occurred to me to do anything else. And I think I always knew that I would study ecology and botany, and that sort of went from there.
Yeah, and you never regretted it, because it seems like it's your passion.
So I don't know. I actually got quite diverted by music for a while because my mother was a musician, a professional cello player. And there was always music in our house, and I learned music from an early age. And orchestral, I just loved orchestral music, and I still do. So that became, a great passion as well. And after I'd done my science degree, I thought I'd give music a go for a while, and I was very tempted at that stage to take it further, but somehow botany or ecology and environmental stuff, and I think I was really getting more interested in the environment and thinking about environmental issues from quite an early age. So in the end, the environment won out professionally, but music and other things have always been there as well.
And Paul, you belong to the Jewish Progressive Synagogue, Jewish Progressive Community in Wellington.
Right.
How did your faith and your faith values have an impact in your seeing of nature and of science?
Well, that's quite a complicated question, particularly in my case, because I came to the religious connection and the faith connection much later. Religion didn't feature in my life at all as a child. My parents were very secular in their life, and our life was secular. So it's a long story how I was attracted to Judaism, and my mother was Jewish, and became gradually more active in the Temple Sinai, the progressive Jewish congregation in Wellington. So in terms of your question, well, I guess there's two sides of it. One is, I mean, I believe that every person's connection with God and in their faith is a very personal matter, and everyone has a personal connection. And in my case, thinking about my connection with God and creation and other human beings, and indeed all, other parts of or other living things on earth, to me, it is all fairly connected, and it's interesting when I think about living here in Aotearoa. What I understand of the Māori concept of whakapapa is really, to me personally, it's quite closely related to my own perception of me in relation to the rest of creation. So that's perhaps part of the answer to your question. And the other part is perhaps more specifically Jewish, that one of the things that I always have felt a very close personal connection is this Jewish concept of tikkun olam, which can be literally translated as healing the world. And that's more or less important to most Jews, but for me it is very central, and I think it's true to say that for progressive Jews it's usually quite an important concept.
Can you tell us a little bit more about Tikkun Olam for those who have never heard of it?
Well, as I've mentioned, the literal translation, as good as I can say it, is healing the world. But it's a very wide concept of the world. It's the world's people. It's not just the environment. So that's the other thing that really appeals to me in a human sense as well as a sort of professional or intellectual sense, is that in my professional life, I've realized that my concern for the environment has to be matched by my concern for other human beings. You can't save the environment without human beings being safe and fulfilled and having a decent standard of living and those sorts of things, and vice versa. You can't help human beings to enjoy security and fulfillment without them having a decent environment. And I would note that Pope Francis's encyclical, I think it was 2015, Laudato Si, was incredibly inspiring, not just for Catholics or for Christians, but for people of many faiths, including myself. Partly because it really encapsulated what I understand of Tikkun Olam. I'm sorry, I can't remember the literal words, but Pope Francis in that encyclical pleas to people who are concerned about environmental improvement to also think about their fellow human beings, and vice versa. People who want to help their fellow human beings think about the for human beings to also think about the environment. So
it is a concept. It's not a day, it's not a feast day, it's not an activity. It's a concept out of which activities can arise. Is that correct?
That's right. it is I guess, a set of precepts. There's no specific day, although I should add that Judaism does have a festival of the trees, Tu B'Shvat. In New Zealand, it's in the middle of summer. Around, well, it's just been, it's usually around the end of January, early February. So we do have a chance to specifically, you could call it a kind of Jewish Arbor Day, perhaps.
Yeah. And you've been on this working group from the Religious Diversity Center, working group concerning climate change with other members of that working group from different faiths. How was your experience? Can you tell us a little bit more about this working group?
Yes, well, it's as far as I'm concerned, it was really initiated by Jocelyn Armstrong from the Religious Diversity Center, who I'd had a little bit of interaction with in the previous couple of years. And she had heard about work that I had done, basically about submissions on some of the climate change legislation 2 or 3 years ago. And we'd been in touch once or twice, but Jocelyn's effort was remarkable, and she saw the need for more work in the climate change area, especially by people of different faiths. And she also saw the opportunity that because she was so energetic within the Religious Diversity Centre, and she had the backing of her fellow trustees, she gathered around her a group of people who were interested and were prepared to make some commitment to working with her on the climate crisis. And we had to fairly quickly group together and work out what our program would be. There was, I think Jocelyn had right from the start an idea that we should be aiming at last November's COP negotiations in Glasgow. So this is the
COP26.
COP26, that's right. So that's the big international effort around the United Nations climate change programs. And last year's was a particularly crucial one, particularly difficult one with the background of COVID, but the mounting biodiversity crisis and the urgent need to address it. And Jocelyn, in turn, was inspired by interfaith work that she was aware of internationally, and people like Maureen Sears from the Interfaith Scotland organisation had already started a lot of work in the Scottish and European churches and interfaith movements, and that provided us with a bit of a background, a bit of a starting point. And so within a short time of starting to get together, and of course all our meetings were by Zoom. I never met Jocelyn face to face until only 2 weeks ago, in fact. And yet we've had a very close sort of working relationship with each other for about 9 months now.
And tell us about the working group. You had different faiths. You had Buddhist and Catholic and Jewish. And how did it work? Did you find that you had a lot in common?
Well, I think so, but I think that really we knew that what we had in common was our concern for the climate crisis, and that we were coming together as people of diverse faiths. And we were very, we knew that we had amongst us people who were quite knowledgeable about the scientific aspects or a particular aspect, some of the social dynamics going on. But what we shared was a faith-based values perspective, and we sort of didn't take long to agree that obviously we weren't going to be pushing a particular religious view, but that we wanted people to understand that a values-based approach to climate change, but also appreciating the real urgent need to understand what was required to address climate, the pressures on humankind.
And you prepared a submission then afterwards?
Yes, well, we were bold enough to call it a statement, not a submission. So we decided that, you know, because several of us had experience of preparing submissions, various submissions, national legislation, at the local level. You know, you can always be working on a submission. So we saw this as being a bit stronger than a submission. So we prepared a statement, quite a short statement about the magnitude and the urgency of the crisis, and urging government to take an ambitious goal to the COP26 negotiation. It wasn't in the framework of any particular call for submissions, but by getting as many signatures as we could from national religious leaders and interfaith groups, we hoped that the statement would have weight in its own right. That was the main thing that we did.
And do you think that you achieved this goal?
I think we were reasonably successful. I can only go by telling you a little bit about the ceremony that we had to launch this mission. And again, this was a tricky matter because we were in the middle of a COVID lockdown. This was by then it was September, October, and we needed to launch the submission before Minister James Shaw went off to the climate negotiation. We found out that we would have the chance to present it to the Minister for Climate Change, and we had to do that before he left, which was, I think, sometime in late October. And then, so we started off organising something actually in Parliament, and there is a set format for these launch events, launching to parliamentarians. We got some sponsoring parliamentarians, and we had the halls booked and all the arrangements being made, and then we were right in lockdown and we ended up not being able to have it within Parliament. So we ended up having a less formal event and quite a small event just across the road in the forecourt of the Anglican Cathedral. And that proved to be a very nice and fitting setting for the ceremony. James Shaw and a couple of his staff were able to just hop over the road from Parliament. We had the two MPs, one from the Labour Party and one from the Greens Party, who were originally going to sponsor our function. They also came. And most importantly, we had a group of a good selection of the national leaders who had signed the submission, the statement, and other leaders and representatives of the faiths came. As I said, we were in the middle of lockdown, so sadly we couldn't have anybody from Auckland, and that was where a lot of the work was done and a lot of our members, and it really was very difficult to travel from other centres. So we had, apart from Wellingtonians, we had a few people who were able to come down by road from Palmerston North and Taranaki. I think those are the people from outside of Wellington. So it was a very, very nice representative gathering of people of diverse faiths and their supporters and some of the parliamentarians that we were hoping to influence. And perhaps you might be able to put up as a companion to this interview a link to the page on the RDC website where there's an edited version of the whole ceremony.
In fact, you can get both versions, the long version and the short version of the RDC website. I was just going to say, yes.
Oh, great.
So the Aucklanders had to watch it on the screen because they couldn't go, but you did very well. So thank you for all this energy that went into organizing it. And James Shaw spoke very well at the event,
yes.
We
got the impression that James himself personally was quite affected and moved by the occasion and the fact that we had managed to do this, and he spoke with some feeling and conviction about his reaction to this statement, and he urged us to continue with our efforts.
Yeah. And Paul, what is the next step for you with that action group?
Well, we've just been working on our program for 2022, and it's a little bit more varied because we've realised that we can't just spend all our time talking to political leaders. That is really important to try and influence policy, but we also have to talk to our own people, as it were, the tens of thousands of adherents and active people of faith who are active in a congregation or a religious organisation of one sort or another. So quite a lot of our work this year will be about programs to reach our own faith members, to become aware of the environmental crisis, as it if people aren't already aware of the urgency and the magnitude of it. Perhaps most importantly of all, to give people a sense of hope that there is something there are things that ordinary citizens and ordinary people of faith can do. Some very inspiring stories of what's going on amongst many different faiths. Most of the different religions that I know of have a variety of different actions, different programs going on.
Can you give us one example, just out of the top of your head?
All right, just out of the top of my head, an example that I really like is something called the Eco Church program that's being run out of some of the Christian churches, which is a variety of different actions and programs that congregations, individual congregants in their families or as a congregation can undertake, either living more sustainably, persuading others to live more sustainably, working with their local councils and so on. And one reason amongst many that I like this program is that there is also the equivalent sort of movement going on in the eco mosque program or eco synagogue program. So again, it's something that transfers very nicely between different faiths.
And I also think that your concept that you mentioned, Tikkun Olam, repairing the world, is also a sign of hope, because if something is still being repaired, then there's hope that it'll work again. That we might not get it to the perfect situation, but at least we can repair it. And maybe we can think about something like kintsugi, where the repairing makes it even more beautiful.
No, I certainly agree with that. And I think the other aspect of hope, especially people of my age who are getting on, is knowing that there are young people who are taking on the challenge, and it is sometimes us oldies get very depressed by the fact that we're leaving the world in such a terrible state to the younger generations. But then we hear about wonderful things that they are doing off their own bat, not needing our leadership at all. But there are, at times, there are ways in which we can usefully support those sorts of actions coming from our younger people.
Thank you very much, Paul. This is a wonderful closing sentence. So thank you very much for your time and for your all the work that you are doing, and especially in this committee. And we will hear from this committee and from you again in the future.
I hope you will, and thank you very much, Beata.
Thank you.